We will now be finishing the exterior of the bag. So first, to do that, we are going to take one of our side accent pieces and we're going to lay it right sides together with the front panel. So the one that has my tag, or whichever one you prefer to work with first. So I'm going to line the side slanted edge of the side accent piece with the side slanted edge of the front panel. So this one here, and the top of the side accent piece is going to align with the top of the front panel. And I'm going to clip these together just like that. Just 2 clips along that edge. And then before I sew that, I'm going to attach the other one as well. So I have the other side accent piece here, and I'm going to line it up with the slanted edge of the front panel, and I'm going to make sure that this corner of the side accent piece aligns with the top of the front panel, and I'm going to clip that in place. And we're going to sew these edges with our normal seam allowance, and we're going to start here at the top and stitch all the way down until we get to this point where these 2 lines intersect. Don't sew all the way to the bottom of the side accent piece, only sew to that point where the lines intersect, and then stop your stitches and back stitch. Don't sew past that point. So do the same on this side as well. I'm going to back stitch at the top and then sew down this edge at our regular seam allowance. And I'm going to keep going until I arrive at that cross. So my needle is down at the point where those 2 lines intersect, and I'm not going to go forward anymore. I'm just going to go backwards to backstitch and lock my stitches. And I'm going to lift my needle and trim my threads. So hopefully you can see here my stitches end right there where the 2 lines intersect. And so on this side, I'm going to be starting with my needle down right where the 2 lines intersect, right there, and then sew up towards the top of the panel. So I'm going to go forward, then backwards, and then forward. Okay, and then back stitch once you get to the top. Okay, so the side accents are now attached to the front panel, just like this, and we are now going to attach one side at a time this time to the back panel. So what I like to do is actually put the back panel right side up on your table, and then put the front right side down on top of the back side. And you're gonna have to kind of angle this so that the side of the side accent piece, the free side that hasn't been sewn, is lined up with the slanted edge of the back. And again, the corner of the side accent piece aligns with the top of the back panel, and we're gonna clip that in place. And we're going to sew this with the side accent piece facing up. And that way you can see where your stitches ended, right where those 2 lines intersect. You can see where that is. If you sewed this from the other side, you would not be able to see it. So we're going to start here at the top, and we're going to sew all the way down with our needle ending right where those 2 lines intersect. Okay, back stitch a bit. And go forward. All right, I'm about to approach the point where the 2 lines intersect, so I'm going to pull and make sure everything is, like, nothing is bunched up or anything, and I'm just going to go slow and get to the point where my needle is down right where the stitches ended last time, and then I'm going to back stitch. Okay. All right, let me show you that here. So my stitches intersect right where those 2 lines intersected, and I didn't go past towards the bottom of the side accent piece. Next, we're going to connect the other side accent with the other side of the back panel, but this one's a little bit more temperamental because you kind of have to warp your front panel a little bit in order to get it to line up, but it shouldn't be too difficult. And I just use a couple clips where I need to in order to get these to line up. Okay, and this time, again, we're gonna start right where the lines intersect. I like to put my hand in between the layers so that I can keep that top layer kind of warped in the right direction while I'm sewing. I'm gonna put my needle down right in the hole of where the stitches ended last time and begin stitching forward and then backwards and then forward. Okay, back stitch at the end. And your side accent pieces are now fully attached to your front and back panels. And we have an opening at the bottom of the bag, and along either side of the bag is open as well. And I'm going to set this aside really quick so that we can add the feet to our base. And here is our base, and we're going to do some measurements for our feet. Now, I like to add my feet 2 inches away from the edge of the stabilizer here and 1.5 inches away from the edge of the base here. So 2 inches away from the edge of the stabilizer and 1.5 inches away from the edge of the base, not 1.5 inches away from the stabilizer. So you're measuring from 2 different points here. Okay, 2 inches and 1.5, and I'm going to make a mark there. I'm going to do the same on all 4 corners. 2 inches away from the end of the stabilizer and 1.5 away from the long edge of the base. Now I am using these pronged feet. They have these prongs here, and your feet might be rivets or they might be screws, but either way, install them the way that the manufacturer explains to. And I'm just going to cut little slits at the marks that I made here with an X-Acto knife. Okay, and then from the right side, I'm going to feed these feet through. I also always stabilize the back of my feet with little pieces of Peltex before I add the washer to the prong, and that just gives it a little bit more to grip onto. There we go. So I bent the prongs down, and now that is secure. And again, I am going to cover the back of these prongs with duct tape to protect my liner, because the bottom of my bag liner is going to be against this part of the base, and I don't want those prongs to rub holes in my liner over time. So I'm going to actually stick those down and flip that over to get that duct tape adhered. Okay, I now have all 4 of my purse feet installed, and I am actually just going to fold this in half to find the center of the long edges. I'm going to just snip a little notch right there, and again on the other side. And next I'm going to retrieve my front and back panels that are connected now, and I'm going to lift up one of the panels and insert my base so that it is right sides together with the panel here. I'm going to line up the center marks and start clipping that base in place. And you'll see that the angles of the base should match up with the angles of the front or back panel, whichever one you're clipping it to at the moment. And the width of the base also matches the width of the panel. So as you can see, the base is clipped along the long edge here in between the two layers of the panels. And I'm going to lift up this panel so that I can stitch this clipped edge. And I've switched my foot to a narrow foot because we are going to be stitching this at 1/2 inch seam allowance, and the base stabilizer is pretty thick and my foot doesn't like to pass over it, because even though we're not sewing over the thickness, it kind of bumps up one side of my foot and the other side is no longer touching the material, and so it kind of floats around. So I have moved to a more narrow foot so that I won't be hitting any of the stabilizer. Okay, I'm going to back stitch at the start and go forward. Make sure to follow those angles. And keep folding back that top panel so you can get to the base. All right. That side is done, and I have now stitched the base to one of the panels, and now I'm going to flip the whole thing over and line up the other side of the base with the long edge of the other panel, and I'm going to clip that in place. Okay, and now I'm going to sew that as well, same way that we did the last one. So our base is now attached by both long edges, and now our base is going to kind of naturally want to fold in half. But what you don't want to do is push it and force it in half along the middle where it's stabilized, and that way we won't crease this stabilizer, but we will fold it in half on the edges here where the base is not stabilized. So go ahead and do that now. Fold the base in half, and you'll notice that the base will align with the side edges when it's folded in half. So just make sure it's straight in there and clip it. I like to clip one clip on the side and one on the bottom, and you'll see that the side of the panels are now clipped and aligned, and if I take this clip away, you can see the fold of the base is in between those layers. Okay, and we are going to stitch down the side of the panel, and you can see here where our stitches ended from when we were attaching the side accent piece. It's very important to start your stitches right there in that stitch hole where we ended our stitches before, and then stitch all the way down to the end here. Now I like to stop my stitches down here where they intersect with the base stitches right here. And that is because later on we're going to be trimming this seam allowance, and if we stop our stitches right here at the seam, then we can just trim all the way across. But if we stop our stitches here at the edge, then we'll be trimming through that stitch line, and I don't like to do that because it could unravel later. So I'm going to just start with my needle down here, start my stitches right here, so all the way down until I get to this stitch line, and then back stitch and end my stitches there. And I'll show you more when we do trim the seam allowance. I'll show you why that's important. Okay, so my needle is going to go down right where the stitches ended from when we were adding the side panels. And I'm going to go forward, and then I'm going to back stitch, and then I'm going to go forward. And right now I'm sewing through both front and back panels and the folded base. And I'm going to back stitch there. Okay, let me show you here. I began with my needle down right where the stitches are, and then I ended my stitch line where the base stitches are. And that way we can just trim off this seam allowance without worrying about trimming through stitches right here. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to unclip this and flip it over. And then again, our base piece is folded in half. And then I'm going to clip the sides to align the sides with the base in between. Right here, you can see here that the base is in between the two layers. And then I'll clip once on the side and once on the bottom, just to keep everything aligned. And I'm going to start with my needle down right where the stitches ended, where we attached the side panel. So next I am going to check right here. I'm going to open up this side accent piece, and I'm going to flip the bottom of the accent piece up just to make sure that this area right here is closed up, because we have 3 seams that kind of converge in this one area, and I want to make sure everything was caught. So it looks good on this side, and I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing. I'm just going to lift up the kind of the point of the side accent piece, and I see that everything is closed up within the seam allowance. And the last thing that we need to do to our exterior kind of shell of our bag is trim down our seam allowances. But you want to do it in a very strategic way. So at the top of the side accent pieces, you want to leave about 1 inch of space untrimmed. So I am going to just start trimming about here, and I'm going to trim down the seam allowance by about half, and then I'm going to veer off once I get towards the bottom, because you do not want to trim the bottom point of the side accent piece. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to start here about 1 inch from the top of the bag, and I'm going to trim all the way down until I get to about here, and then I'm going to veer off. And the reason you want to do that is because you don't want to trim any of the bottom of the side accent, because if you trim that, it could become too short to stay on the inside of the bag. It might try to work its way to the outside, and you don't want that. You want that extra space at the point. So I'm just going to continue on with just the seam allowance of the pocket panel, and then do the same thing on the other side of the side accent. So start about 1 inch from the top, and once I get to the bottom of the side accent, I'm going to veer off. So you can see the seam allowance at the tip of the side accent piece is still long, and then I'm going to trim down the side of the pocket panel. And then I don't want to trim over any stitches, and there's a stitch line that goes right here from when we attached the base to the main panels. So I am going to veer off so that I avoid cutting those stitches right there. And next I'm going to go across the bottom. So I'm going to cut all the way across the bottom, but since it splits, I'm going to do one side at a time. All right, and then I like to reach into the bag and kind of pop out that base so that it's sitting flat and not folded in half anymore. And the exterior of your bag is going to sit wrong side out until we are ready to attach the liner.